Hi, and welcome back. This is Disability Saves the World with Dr. Fady Shinuda. I am Fady Shinuda. This podcast brings you insights from leading experts in disability and math studies from around the world. You'll hear about the research and work of disabled scholars, activists, artists, and our allies. You'll also get some insight into their lives, their favorite non-DS activities, hobbies, and adventures. Most importantly, you'll hear how they think disability can save the world. My name again is Fady Shinuda. I use he, him pronouns, and I identify as a fat, disabled, cis man of color. On today's show, I'm joined by Dr. Beth Haller, professor of mass communication at Townsend University in the United States. Beth, who uses she, her pronouns, is everything disability news and media. Her current book project is about disabled media creators, people doing podcasts and web series, TV and film, online publications and writing. I'm very excited to have her on the show to talk about her work.
One of the things that I'm going to be writing about in this book is, a show like Life Goes On that started in the late 80s and starred somebody with Down syndrome. I did some interviews when I was in Los Angeles in January. 2 or 3 women who are the mothers of actors with Down syndrome told me that they saw an actor with Down syndrome on TV and it totally changed their worldview.
Her life outside of academia.
I'm so glad I got to meet Stella Young. Was a blast, just because she was so fun. She had this quote from American disability activists tattooed on her arm. So I got this really great picture of her with her quote from this disabled poet in the States. And so just to me, I love that because it's like, it shows the interconnectedness. Here's somebody from Melbourne, Australia, and here's a, disabled writer and poet from Denver, Colorado, and how we're all connected.
And to ask her how she thinks disability can save the world. Hi, Beth.
Hi, Fady.
Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd like to jump right into something, to the first segment, which I like to call Inside the Project, the research, the work, the art. I guess I want to know, first off, how did you get involved in disability studies?
Ooh, long time ago. Back when I started my master's program at the University of Maryland at College Park, I had been a journalist before that, a print newspaper journalist in the Midwest and in Texas, where I'm originally from. And so I was doing this project in my master's program that was kind of a long form magazine style piece. And I wanted to do something that would involve translation or something that would make it harder on me since I'd already been working as a journalist. So I don't know why it popped into my head, but I'll tell you why I think it popped into my head. So the University of Maryland is right in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And this was in 1989 that I was in this class, or 1990, sometime around then. And so I said, well, what can I do to get some kind of interview with somebody where I would use a translator? And it suddenly Gallaudet University popped into my head. And so I decided I would profile a student at Gallaudet. And so I went down there and I didn't really actually have a translator. So I don't know why I was thinking I would have a translator because I didn't know sign language. I don't think I started taking sign language after that. I wasn't very good at it. Anyway, but so of course, when I called Gallaudet to get set up to interview somebody, they set me up with a student body president. So I show up at Gallaudet and I'm sitting there in the student government office, just kind of like chatting with the student who's, working as like the receptionist or assistant or whatever, sitting in there. And I had continued to talk to this woman. It was a young woman that was sitting there at the desk. And I said, can I profile you? And so, and their parents were very anti-sign language. They were from Montreal. And so I think it was very clear why she and her twin were so far away from their family. Yeah. She said they were told to like sit on their hands. I mean, they're twins. They're going to have like their own kind of like talking to each other anyway. But it was really interesting to hear her talk about, what her life was like and, just moving through the world as a deaf woman and and she could speak well enough that I could understand her, and we'd write notes if she couldn't read my lips. Um, so, I kind of like started doing this story about her and wondering, well, has anybody done mass communication research about people with different disabilities, and how they're represented in the media? And I'm like, no, no, no. I found like, maybe one study in like 1930 or something. So I like to do things other people don't do. And I mean, once you
Yeah.
start getting into kind of the disability studies world, you realize how connected everybody is to disability. Like I grew up next door, practically like a little brother to me, with a guy who has an intellectual disability, still lives next door to my parents' house in Texas. I'm actually working on a project recently about my mom's best friend. And so if I ever look at my parents' wedding album, right there in the lineup of the bridesmaids was this disabled woman who was my mom's childhood best friend. And she was a polio survivor. She was also born with some disabilities. So, once you start thinking about disability,
Yeah.
it's part of our life. It's just other people put it as other, but
Yeah.
once you're indoctrinated in a good way, into the disability studies mindset, then you see that it's just the community is part of us.
Totally.
So I did that interview for my writing class, and then I had to think of my thesis idea. I ended up doing my master's thesis on how the Washington Post and the New York Times had covered the deaf community. And because it became clear to me that probably the reason that I knew about Gallaudet was because the year before, 1988, was when the Deaf President Now movement was, where
Right.
the deaf students took over the campus because they didn't appoint a deaf president, and they got them to change that and appoint I. King Jordan. And so I was, in the news world, and so I'm sure I read stories about it as a journalist, stories that I'd done as a journalist. And like when I was at the Amarillo, Texas newspaper, I did a series on Down syndrome in like the mid 80s. And I let Chelsea read my articles and so to see what she thought of them, and she liked them. But I'm still trying to remember why I would have done a series on Down syndrome in the mid 80s. And I think it was because that was when they were beginning to understand that people with Down syndrome should not be institutionalized, that with early intervention and learning and stuff, and that not everybody with Down syndrome has intellectual disability, that it's a wide spectrum of, different conditions related to Down syndrome. And I never will forget the stories I did. In fact, I still talk about them in class, because there was one particularly poignant older gentleman in his like late 30s, early 40s son that I interviewed. And so the son would have been born in like the late 50s. And they tried to take the kid away from he and his wife. The father was telling me this is their first child. They had 4 kids, and their oldest is the one that had Down syndrome. And this is a working class guy in Amarillo, Texas. And he went in after his wife had the baby, and the doctor was like, oh, we're not going to it's better if we just take him, you don't see him, and we just take him and put him in institution.
Yeah.
Good on this good working class guy. He just like hell you are. He just like marched into the nursery, grabbed up his son, got to get dressed. We're leaving. They're trying to take away our kid, like.
Amazing.
And later on, when I was actually working on my thesis, I remember reading after the ADA was passed in 1990, they did a lot of different attitude studies about disability in the States. And I remember this one citation that really popped out at me, and it was about acceptance of family members. And they kind of found this connection between education and acceptance, and the less education you had, the more you accept your child with a disability, especially intellectual disability. And just jumping back to that story I did about his son, it really, and also I think there's different perspectives. I mean, we're talking about people being college educated. A lot of times they get so focused on, okay, what is a doctor telling me I should do? They don't even think that this is my child. Maybe I should do what I think is best for my child. And, so I think a lot of middle and upper middle class people got really ripped apart their families because of these old ways, whereas like more working class familial structure, like immigrant families and stuff like that, they just gave them the kid and they're probably happily, integrated them into their family and no big deal. And so, you know, even education can be kind of not the right end of the stick. Anyway, back to my thesis. So my thesis was looking at how the Washington Post had covered the deaf community before the Deaf President Now movement, during the Deaf President Now movement, and then after the Deaf President Now movement. And one thing I found, which, you don't know what you're going to find, but I'm glad I found it, is that, the journalists changed. They were learning while they were covering Deaf President Now. They learned how to refer to people. They learned about the issues. And a lot of deaf people already worked at the Washington Post. They worked in the print, ran the printing presses and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
So, the Washington Post has always done a pretty decent job of covering the deaf community because the community a lot of deaf people live in Washington, D.C. But it was just obvious to watch them kind of change their language, and now they knew about these community issues because of a major event. So I decided to go on for my PhD at Temple University in Philadelphia. And by this point, the Americans with Disabilities Act, our federal disability rights law, had been passed. So I started at Temple in 1991. So it had passed in 1990. And, I was like, well, I'm going to look at how the ADA is, then I looked at even more. I looked at the 3 major news magazines. I looked at television news. It was actually like 3 dissertations in one. I looked at print newspapers, about 8 or 10 different newspapers. And back then, these were before the internet, so very viable. This is how people got their news.
Of course.
I saw the same thing, because the way the law was passed in the U.S., the Americans with Disabilities Act was basically written by disability advocates. The correct language was put into the law. And so it was really interesting to watch how just the language especially changed, because they would just, people think, oh, the news media are such big watchdogs and they do what they want. Actually, there was one researcher that called them lapdogs because, if it comes from the government, they just like spew it back exactly like the government said. And so in this particular case, that was an excellent thing. They were just spewing back the ADA rhetoric from the law. But the problem came a few years after my dissertation. So I finished it in 1995. And so what happened then was that the disability rights community, and they've owned up to this too, they felt like, oh, well, we have our law. We don't need to have to do all this advocacy work anymore. And the media always get it wrong, so we don't need to be engaging with them. And so the business community like slipped in there and they kind of started controlling the rhetoric. And so for like 15 years or more, the ADA really wasn't being enforced. And journalists didn't really know who to talk to because they didn't know about disability rights organizations. They didn't know about independent living. And the business people were happy to tell you about how much this is going to cost them.
Yeah.
And so, and a lot of the disabled advocates were like avoiding the media. And so, it taught everyone a lesson about you can't just rely on a law to be enforced. And one thing that a lot of people don't understand about the US is that, yes, we have this fantastic disability rights law, but it all depends on who's in the White House. Because a president, even when George Bush was president, it wasn't that his father's the one that signed the ADA. And it wasn't that he was against disability rights, but he just wanted his own Republican approved kind of way he would help disabled people instead of just using the law because the business people didn't want the ADA to exist.
Yeah.
So, and it was too early really for Clinton to do that much. And so really, it didn't really start getting enforced until President Obama was in the White House. And and it wasn't even that he knew anything about disability rights law. It's just, he said, go and enforce the law. And since so many federal agencies, Department of Justice, Department of Education, Department of Transportation, all these different federal agencies are supposed to be enforcing the ADA. And he just said, go enforce the laws of this country. And so they did. And that's why we saw so much enforcement when he was in the White House.
Right.
Of course, now they're trying to rescind the ADA now that Trump is in the White House.
Oh, God.
Really, in the first few months of Trump's presidency, there was a big push. And, they wanted Congress to repeal the ADA. And, this also relates to media, because now that we have social media and disabled people are able to really control the narrative themselves and have so much bigger platforms, because, people on Facebook and YouTube and, Twitter can really explain to the general public directly how this will impact them. Then they got people on their side. And I think a lot of Congress people heard from everybody that, no, we don't want you to get rid of the ADA. So, the media is always in there when all this is going on. And so, and the other thing that was always really surprising to me is, I think because disability studies grew out of more liberal arts and even some rehabilitation and sociology and stuff like that, there was hardly anyone doing media stuff at all. One of my very first Society for Disability Studies meetings in the early 90s, people would literally come up to me and say, oh yeah, that's really great idea to do stuff on the media, but we can't, focus on that. We have bigger things to do. We got to get people out of nursing homes and get people jobs and education and stuff. And I'm like, how are you going to do that if you don't have public opinion on your side? So, I mean, still in the 90s, people thought that they could just push forward and get things changed for the disability community and not engage in the media at all. And of course, my bias toward the media have massive influence in our lives. But I mean, one of the things that I'm going to be writing about in this book is, a show like Life Goes On that started in the late 80s and starred somebody with Down syndrome. I did some interviews when I was in Los Angeles in January. And, 2 or 3 women who are the mothers of actors with Down syndrome told me that they saw an actor with Down syndrome on TV and it totally changed their worldview. One was actually told by her obstetrician to take a break every afternoon and watch a specific soap opera, and it had an actor with Down syndrome on it. And I don't think she even knew that she was having a child with Down syndrome. And I don't think her doctor knew. He just wanted her to take a break. And so he just recommended this soap. And the other one had seen, and she now is an agent in Hollywood for people with disabilities who want to get into acting. But the other one said she'd actually seen a guest star on some show. I think it was a TV show, Quincy, which was about a medical examiner. And her daughter's in her late 30s now, and she was on the show Born This Way. And she said, just seeing that one actor with Down syndrome on one episode of a TV show when you have a baby with Down syndrome changes your life. I mean, your whole life has changed. And so people that say, oh, the media have no impact, I'm like, yeah, talk to these people and tell me it has no impact. All the disabled people I've talked to, and they talk about the first disabled person they saw on TV, somebody like Jerry Jewell, or, more recent times, Zach Honor, or Micah Fowler on Speechless. Those kids that see that are going to be able to articulate, 20 years later when they decide to go into a theater major, that's why, when I got this idea from Whoopi Goldberg, the comedian and actor, because she always talks about how, she was watching TV and the original Star Trek came on, and here was this Black woman right there behind the captain. And she's like, what? I could do this? And I mean, people think, oh, it's just a bunch of, stuff that's entertainment. No, entertainment, in my opinion, has the most power because you're just kind of relaxing, enjoying something. And then when you see something that reflects your community, it's going to change your life, and it could change your community's life
I,
too.
I agree with you like very, very much. I think media is an incredibly powerful force, and I think I think it needs more studying. I think it needs more research. And I think the work that you're about to do now is like particularly interesting. This upcoming book project that you're working on, where you're kind of looking at disabled people as they create things unfiltered, right? No networks, no editors, no producers, no, you're looking at the people making it, talking it from their perspective, and putting it out on all these different social media platforms. And so social media is not just being used for the activism that you're referring to before, but also now to, create a disability culture that pokes fun of ourselves, right? Has insights.
And even in
Um,
mainstream stuff too. I mean,
yeah, of
I'm going to
course. Yeah.
include
So
people that
tell us,
are in
how did you get to this
mainstream.
project? How did you come up with this kind of idea?
I don't know. I just started noticing there were so many people that, well, first I did that book in 2015 that you helped me present on about Helen Keller's writing. And I mean, think about it. She was a media creator. Uh, the reason I did that book is because nobody knew about, even her biographers did not know about this magazine column she wrote for 5 years in the 1930s. And so she had an influence on the culture. Women were reading that magazine and seeing her byline. And so,
Sorry,
to
I'm
me,
just
that was
moving.
another kind of influence that, people we don't even think about have contributed to the media. People like Helen Keller and, the film freaks and all kinds of people with discipline. There was a guy who didn't want to do the dress up anymore and asked to become a shop owner, so they just gave him his own shoe shop. But so people with disabilities have been involved in all of our media since it has existed, basically. And the deaf community was very involved in the silent film era. They were the actors. So anyway, once I started seeing social media and all these web series, and that people could actually create their own, I interviewed when I was on the West Coast last summer. I interviewed Teal Scherer, who has a web series called My Gimpy Life, which is fantastic. She was
So
also,
good.
yeah,
So
it's so
good.
good. She starred in the was it the Cost of Living, the disability related play in Vancouver in the fall. And then I think she went to Edmonton. So she was also, and then she was on an episode of NCIS on traditional broadcast TV. So, I mean, people, and also she now lives in Seattle. So you don't have to live in Los Angeles anymore to create media,
Yeah.
as we know now with the pandemic happening, everyone can create everything from their own home, and put it out there. They've already been working from home. They've already had all the creative solutions about how to get their content out there when they can't get out of their house because the world is inaccessible or it's too dangerous now with the pandemic. So, and I hope that, one of the things that comes out of the post-pandemic world is, so if me continuing to work here at my kitchen table is the best for me, then why can't I just continue doing that? Why do I have to go back into the classroom where I might put at risk, of getting the COVID virus? So, if we get a positive out of this pandemic, I hope it will be what the disabled people that have been working from home forever will teach us. And
Absolutely.
they've also been doing a lot of stuff online too.
Absolutely. Did this book that you're writing, I wondered if you, is there a particular way that you find these disabled creators? Like, how do you stumble upon them? Is it
I'm just
systematic,
like
or is
all
it?
over the media all the time. I mean, I watch a lot of TV too.
Yeah.
And I'm all over social media. I mean, I learn about everything now so much through social media. I mean, yeah, I watch regular TV too, but like my feed is filled with this richness from the disability community and the disability culture. Like, and now with the pandemic, I feel like I've gone back to my journalism roots. I'm like aggregating information from all these news sources, and I know what's reputable and I know what's BS, and I'm not going to retweet or post or anything.
Yeah.
And so, I feel like it's a way to that I'm just like seeing stuff, like, so I followed Gail Williamson. She's the one I was talking about, who has a son who's an actor with Down syndrome and became an agent. She's still an agent in Hollywood. Skimming Facebook last night, and she'd posted that this show called, now I'm going to Stumptown. It's based on a graphic novel, and she has a younger brother played by what's his name? I'm blanking on his name. I'll have to get it for you later. Anyway, he's an actor with Down syndrome who plays her younger brother in the graphic novel. The main character's younger brother has Down syndrome. So we're seeing, people being much more authentic. And I think there's a hunger for authenticity now. Social media, I don't know what has like shifted people. I think when it was a traditional like network TV kind of world, everyone just thought it was fine that everything was fantasy. But I think now with social media, people are seeing the real voices of people with disabilities. So they know what's BS and I have people that are like literally upset. They will like message me and say, "Oh, I just really got into this new show and I thought I was going to tell you to watch it. And then I found out that's not even played by an actor with a disability." So they're now like people that know nothing about it. I was going to really get into this show. What? She's not disabled? So that's like really a turning point.
Huge.
That, people have no connection to the disability world. They don't want these fake people. I see it in my class. It doesn't take, but like, why would they? What's wrong with them? Why would they? I think the younger generation, of course, they don't want fake people, playing somebody that isn't that disability or whatever. I've only had like over the course of, we've had disability studies at Townsend since 2013. I've been teaching it every semester except the one that I had a sabbatical. And so I think I've had like 2 students push back, and I think they were pushing back not because they are so in love with having non-disabled people play disabled. It's just there's some group of people that are still so afraid for people that like, oh no, it might be too hard on them. So it comes from a place of like caring, but they don't realize that it's kind of patronizing.
Of course.
To believe that. But they're young, so I usually forgive them. Try to hope that, and so a couple of them will gripe in the evaluations, like, she's pushing her political agenda. I'm like, yeah, my political agenda is equality, getting rid of ableism. I was talking to a friend who gave me his like statement that he puts when he's, because especially since our program is in our College of Health Professions, we're getting the mass communication students in my class actually get it really fast, because a lot of them are taking it even though it's elective because they have some connection disability, you have a sibling or something like that, or a relative or a friend. But the College of Health Professions, some of those students, they want to help people. But I've even seen them really change now. And so they now understand that it's more of a collaborative process, that working with people with disabilities should not be them helping, and also being more holistic. Some of disability studies actually came from occupational therapy, which is the most holistic of all the helping professions, because they're not like, oh, we're just going to work on getting your finger to work again. They look at your whole body, your whole occupation. What do you need to achieve? And so the disability kind of becomes just a sideline for what do you need to achieve and how can we make that happen. So but it's shocking to see even people that like speech pathologists were always really focused on, oh, you just have to have this normal speech, whatever they're defining as that, and a lot of them have come totally 180 degrees, like, no, we need to look at all these different speech devices. I gave a keynote address at an aphasia conference a couple of years ago. It's called Aphasia Access, and they clued in really early the speech pathologists that work at least these that work with people with aphasia, that the people with aphasia usually are older. And what they were seeing was that, okay, suddenly they have communication disability and their family doesn't know what to do. So they don't even call them anymore. So they're teaching them all kinds of social media so they can interact with people on Facebook, and they're teaching them to Skype and do video chats. And I had this fantastic experience of somebody introducing themselves to me via Pinterest. Her stroke had affected her vocal cords, so she was never going to be speaking verbally again. So she showed me, her life with these Pinterest pictures. It was the most eye-opening thing that has ever happened to me. I knew her better by looking at those Pinterest pictures, because after 3 pictures, I've seen her house, her dog, her daughter. Then she starts showing me all the TV shows she likes, and it was all stuff I was like, what? This is what you're interested in? She was into like Westerns on TV. This is an African-American woman from Baltimore, Maryland, who loves the Old West and anything with all these Old West stars like Rory Calhoun and all this people. And I was like, I got so much more depth of getting to know her through those pictures. If we talked verbally, yeah, hi, this is my name. Hi, this is my name. Yeah, I live in Baltimore. Yeah, I live in Baltimore, whatever. I mean, it's like the pictures really revealed who she was. And I did a chapter about that, and I collaborated with a researcher named Meryl Alper, who looks at how children use and are basically hacking a lot of children with like cerebral palsy or autism that use communication devices, how they were like communicating in different ways. Like she gives the example of a kid with autism who used his iPad to kind of curate a iTunes list for his mom who was going through chemotherapy. So he was talking to her with this list of music that he wanted her to hear. And so this was his way of saying, I love you. It was beautiful.
That's beautiful.
So, I think that's the beauty of all kinds of communication, is we don't have to fit everything in like this box of the past. And watching some YouTube show where somebody has a speech disability and there's captions, so it doesn't really matter.
Right.
So I think it really is widening up contact at the college level, because they'll listen to whatever you say and change their attitudes. So, disability kind of out in the media. And I think that's really important for people that are going to work with somebody with a disability.
Of course.
Once, before I was even teaching this class, we have a Hussman Center for Adults with Autism at Townsend. And I think the director asked me to come and give a talk about media to these mentors. We have a mentor program, so a young adult with autism, and so all these students. And the other thing I'm learning too is that a lot of people going into health professions are into hands-on kind of activities because they want to be a nurse or therapist or something. So I'm talking to them, and this is back when Parenthood was on, and it had a character with autism, not played by an autistic kid. But anyway, but it still was talking about autism in a family. None of the kids that were the mentors really had heard of this. My point, people are coming to you for a 50-minute appointment or whatever for their physical therapy, but they've been out in the world for 23 other hours where, people are treating them a different way because they saw a show on TV the night before, or they watched a YouTube video, or they saw some thread on Twitter. And back when the Farley brothers were doing their kind of gross out movies, apparently it was a scene in Dumb and Dumber with the mall. She's low vision and uses a white cane. So she was in this mall, and she overheard these kids coming out of that movie saying, oh, look, there's a blind person. Let's go knock her cane away, like in the movie. Of course, they thought she was deaf too. So she heard what they were saying. They didn't come, luckily, and knock her cane away. But, it just shows that there's an impact that the media is having on anybody that's seeing this. The other thing is, a lot of times the media is subverting the real stories of disabilities. And that's what I see, and why I want to do this book so badly, is because now we can finally get the stories of the real people with disabilities. And like I said, even in the mainstream kind of media content, a friend did a paper on Marlee Matlin when she was in The L Word, the Showtime show about lesbians from 2004. So the first version, not the most recent version. Anyway, and it became very clear they had this baby character in the show that Marlee Matlin had taught the baby sign language, because babies take to sign language really well. And so, in fact, Jennifer Beals, she had a baby around that time, and she and Marlee Matlin were friends. So she taught her baby sign language too. And I know plenty of people that teach their infant sign language because your hand dexterity is much faster to be able to use than your vocal cords. So lots of 6-month-olds can sign just fine. Anyway, so she was, even though she didn't have producer credits or anything on that show, she was still having an influence in certain things that were being portrayed in certain ways. And so even in the most high budget Hollywood film, and that's the kind of real kind of cherry on top, the pre-pandemic cherry on top of all this is while I was in Los Angeles in January, I was doing those interviews with one of the people from the reality show Born This Way about people with Down syndrome. I interviewed Gil Williamson, who is the agent for all these people with disabilities. And then I gave a talk at Lionsgate Film Studio because they were launching an effort to make sure all their films had authenticity. So they asked me to come and give a talk. It was fantastic because I found out about they were having a film that started, it was supposed to be released on Mother's Day. Sadly, of course, the pandemic didn't let that happen. But anyway, the first film, Hollywood film, it basically had 2 stars and a wheelchair user. It was a mother-daughter story. That was the first Hollywood movie poster that had a real person with a disability, a wheelchair user in it in 2020. But so Hollywood now knows don't actually hire people with disabilities. And a few years ago, I was thinking of doing a project with Dominic Evans, who's a filmmaker with a disability. But he and I were talking, and we're like, with all the CGI, they've used CGI to disable somebody in Forrest Gump. They use CGI to disable Jake Gyllenhaal in Stronger. They could use CGI to use disabled actors if they need them to be in a backstory where they're walking or something. They should be going that direction with the CGI, hiring the disabled actor who has the actual experience with disability that they can bring to the role. And if they need them to be able-bodied at some point, they can hire a younger person to play them if it's really far in the past, or just CGI their head onto, a body double. If they can do it to create disability, they can sure as heck do it to create an able-bodied person for the
absolutely
backstory, So anyway, I'm very hopeful about things moving forward.
Yeah,
I think authenticity is really valued these days, and so I think we're finally turning a corner. And even disability studies, I think now there's so many more people focused on media these days.
Yes,
And that is a real blessing, I think.
That's
to the
great. Yeah. I want to move on to segment 2, what I like to
Okay.
call the middle or the liminal. What is your best advice for young students or young academics?
Do what's your passion. I know it's going to be rough economic times in the future, but I always have told students, no matter what their interest area, if you do what you're passionate about, the money will come at some point. At least you'll be happy. But back, 20 years ago, I would see sometimes students doing majors and things that they thought would bring them money. It's not a cliche. No amount of money can really make you happy if you're miserable and not getting to pursue what you really want to pursue.
Yeah.
But also really evaluate what kind of life you want, because as we were talking about, maybe undergraduate, graduate degrees are not what will make you happy. Maybe being a master gardener will make you happy. Maybe being an auto mechanic will make you happy. And those are good paying jobs. I mean, if you're a landscape gardener, you could have you could do all kinds of creative things, if you're the landscaper for some major organization, so, I think picking and also what fits with what your philosophy of life is, like, yeah, you can go get a degree that you think will make you lots of money, but that's probably going to not be what fits with what you really want to do. But if you're somebody that wants to make buku bucks and you love doing business stuff, then that's what you should do. But, it's a lot about kind of really evaluating who you are. And I think we could all do with a lot more self-awareness about really what is important to us, and also not trying to, because I sometimes talk to my students that, have disabilities, and they put so much pressure on themselves. And I was like, why don't stress yourself out so much? They want to get things in on some deadline when I'm telling them that I'm going to give them extended time. And like, I'm just like, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. I'm going through that with a particular student right now that, has been in and out of the hospital and still wants to try to make the final deadline. And I was like, it'd be better for everyone. And it's not going to hurt her grade or anything if she would just take a few extra weeks after the semester is over. But I think, especially in the States, we just get so much pressure from, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to, chill and Netflix and chill, even though it's kind of coined here, is not what enough people are doing.
Absolutely.
My recommendation is Netflix and chill a lot.
All right.
YouTube and chill.
On to segment 3, outside the project, the research, the work, the art. You've met a lot of famous people, so this will be an easy question. Most famous person you've met, and what was that experience like?
Well, I've met a lot of the disabled actors that I've wanted to meet. Jerry Jewell, who's the first recurring disabled actor on TV. She was in Facts of Life back in the 80s. So I met her at a Real Abilities Film Festival event. I got to meet Rachel from Born This Way in January. Got to meet Robert David Hall from CSI. He's an amputee who played the longtime medical examiner on that show. Occasionally would they mention his disability, but he's an amputee. Who else? So, for me, it's a lot of the Maysoon Zayed, the comedian Stella Young. I got to meet her.
Wow.
So, like, for me, it's all the famous disabled people who are changing media or have changed media.
Any memorable stories from meeting those people?
I'm so glad I got to meet Stella Young. Was a blast, just because she was so fun. She had this quote from American disability activists tattooed on her arm. So I got this really great picture of her with her quote from this disabled poet in the States. And so just, to me, I love that because it's like, it shows the interconnectedness. Here's somebody from Melbourne, Australia, and here's a, disabled writer and poet from Denver, Colorado, and how we're all connected now. And again, I think it's the internet and it's social media, especially social media, because I think the internet was a good first step, but it was still not that accessible. But I think Web 2.0 and the more interactive nature of social media means that, like this morning I chatted with friends in Manchester, England on WhatsApp, chat with a friend in Tokyo on Facebook video. I'm going to interview one of the people I'm interviewing for my book is a guy named Raoul Krauthausen, who is a disabled guy in Germany who has his own TV show and does a lot of advocacy there. So, just the way that I can connect to people and getting to interview Teal Shearer. So just
you can just connect with all these people. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Right. And but they can also see who you are. I remember the very first days of kind of some of the stuff. My friend Sean Burns, I think, did you meet him at some of the one of the conferences in, maybe you did meet him. Anyway, no, he was in Montreal, not Toronto. So he does similar research to me. He's in He teaches at the University of Wollongong in Australia. So about 10 years ago, I just get this random email from this guy. He's in this town called this university called Wollongong. I'm like, what is this? Like, who is this guy? Like, it just like, that was in more of the email time frame. So there wasn't social media yet. And it was just like this out of the blue email from this guy who said he was interested in news media stuff about disability. But he always jokes about this too, because the thing that really got me to not just blow off the email was he said, oh, my wife has a blog about our son who has cerebral palsy and his inclusive education journey. And so Mac, their son, was about 5 and he's 16, I think, 16 or 17 now. And so her blog is called Inky Ed. And so she did all kinds of great stories about, how inclusive education is fantastic and all the great benefits he got from it and the nice things that other kids did and stuff. And so, of course, when I saw his wife and kid, I was like, oh, he's a good guy. Look at his nice wife and kid.
The internet allowed you to verify.
Right. And then, like we became really close friends and I got them over to the Society for Disability Studies conference when it was in Orlando, Florida. And so I said, Sean, please bring Gina and Mac. And so they did, because it was Florida. They could go do fun stuff. And I really wanted Mac, who has really significant cerebral palsy and uses his ankle. His mom has taught him Morse code, and so he can move his ankle. And so he uses his ankle to like communicate yes and no and do some Morse code and stuff. And I wanted to meet my friend Matthew Wangeman. You've met Matthew, right?
I don't know.
He's been to SDS. So he has a head stick that's in a bicycle helmet, and he uses a letterboard.
Maybe
yes. At Northern Arizona University. So I just really, really, really wanted Mac to meet Matthew, so we could like meet an adult who uses a communication device. And so they were together at my session, actually, which was on communication disabilities and the media at SDS in Orlando. I got this great picture of Matthew and Mac, like with both of their communication devices, and Gina's back there too. And, like it was really important for me to put these two people from two parts of the planet together. And, they become really good friends. And when he did a study leave and they drove to Arizona and hung out with Matt and Flagstaff. And, the second they met him, they also knew what I knew, which is Mac needs to know. They live in a very small
Of course.
town. They live on a farm.
Representation, once again, whether it's on TV or whether it's in person, right?
Right.
It's like seeing another person, right? Seeing,
Right.
yeah.
This was like, 10 years before the TV show Speechless existed.
Exactly.
People with communication disabilities, you had to seek them out. So, that was like, to me, the people I meet, bringing together people I meet is really enjoyable to me, because I think they, getting to be interviewed by Judy Heumann for her podcast was awesome too. Like here's like basically the mother of the disability rights movement in America, absolutely, who actually wants to talk to me because she got interested in media when she did that Ford Foundation fellowship. So she did a big report that came out last year, the year before, about disability in the media. And, so she wanted to meet me. So, that is.
So you've met lots of people, brought lots of people together. Clearly,
try to.
fame is always around you.
It actually benefits me in other ways than just my ego too. Like just 2 days ago, I got an email out of the blue from somebody who was finishing up this documentary called The R Word film. And it's really great because it really interrogates like this horrible disability slur, but also digs into like some of the policy stuff, because, we had a law passed in the States called Rose's Law that changed that terminology for the federal government, and already was changed in Maryland state government. And, also the kind of the power of sibling relationships and family relationships and inclusive education, and just how, and they have this woman who's won lots of gold medals in the Special Olympics talk about how you know, sticks and stones may break your bones and words don't hurt you is a lie. It's a big lie. She's like, yeah, you won't remember that somebody threw a rock at you, but you're going to remember that slur they threw at you 30 years later,
Yeah, totally.
So anyway, I think that was, because I've now, like, I know so many people, I get these people just reaching out. So I watched the film. I'm going to do an endorsement quote for the film.
Very cool.
But, now that I've seen it, I'm like, okay, I need to have the people with Gadim, the global group, my friend in Brazil, my friend in Australia, we three need to start promoting it with Gadim. And, a friend of mine who's in Arizona who has a daughter with Down syndrome, who's a journalist. I was like, you're going to need to see this once it's out because this is really important, and she's working on a project through the Neiman Fellowship at Harvard to start figuring out a way to get more news about and to people with intellectual disabilities, making sure they're part of the conversation and people aren't just talking about them in the media. And her daughter is like phenomenal. She's been doing, since the pandemic started, she's a really talented dancer. And so every day she posts a Facebook video of her daughter doing her daily dance. And it's been awesome. It's so cool.
Very cool. I wondered if you could share with us what you're reading now.
So I usually just, before I go to sleep, I like to read some kind of just like boring novel. Not boring, but some just like engaging novel. I'm reading Mrs. Everything right now, which is about these two women as they go through the 50s, 60s, and 70s to present day. And they're two sisters. One's gay and one's straight, but they get onto different paths. So it's kind of like a women's history through these two characters, but not in a boring way. It's very engaging because they end up on each other's path, and it's not a happy situation for parts of their lives. So that's enjoyable. What did I read before that? I have to open up my Kindle to find out what I read before that. I just like a engaging novel before I go to sleep.
Would you recommend your book, Miss Everything?
Mrs. Everything.
Mrs. Everything, sorry.
It's Jennifer Weiner is the author. She's done a lot of women's books. Sure, it's fun. It's a fun read. Once I'm done with something, I can't remember. I've been watching a lot of TV, but it's been interesting because I've been trying to stay away from like really heavy, depressing stuff.
Yeah, of course.
So in the first few weeks of the pandemic, I would just like go to the comedy section because I have both streaming and on-demand stuff. So I just like, let me grab some of these things that my favorite TV show is Call the Midwife. If you want lots of good disability content, I assume you can get it in Canada. We get it on PBS here in the States. But anyway, I don't usually cry at TV. Well, not before the pandemic. I didn't usually cry at TV. But that one gets me because they're just the way they tell the stories of poor people, and they don't shy away from the tragedies because the person that created it really went into the archives of what was going on in the poverty section of London in that time with healthcare. They have hired zillions of disabled actors. And so like 2 weeks ago in the States, the episode had a blind mother played by a blind actor. And they have several actors with Down syndrome on there. But this is the first time I think they've had a blind actor. And it was really, really excellent. They didn't like shy away from problems and bad family members and all that kind of thing. And they really dealt with it with all the nuances. So that would be TV I recommend. I was watching this comedy called The Instant Family. Doesn't necessarily have disability in it, but it's about foster kids. And a couple, Mark Wahlberg and Rose Byrne, who become the parents of these foster kids. And I thought, it was just going to be some goofy comedy. It was fantastic. It really, really interrogated the foster care system. And I mean, they were, like not great at some time. I mean, just like when you're creating a family of people that don't know each other, like it was very kind of normalizing. And so after I watched that, it was really good. And the kid actors were fantastic too.
That's
And
so
it suddenly
great.
struck me like, what's going on with like foster kids during the pandemic? And I just
Yeah.
started Googling around. Oh my God, like courts were shut down. People were in like bad situations and weren't getting to be transferred out. Adoptions were being put on hold. So from a nice, great movie, I went and found really horrific news. But some of the courts are now opening up, so people are getting their kids and adoptions are opening up and stuff. But
That's good.
anyway, but it's just funny how like I'll just think I'm just watching some comedy and then it will like, what's going on with this community during the
Yeah.
pandemic? I mean, I'm Googling after everything I watch, what's going on with this or that. And this series on PBS in the last week or so about the history of Asian Americans in America. That was really rough. The first couple episodes, because of the internment and stuff, was
Yeah.
really rough. But then the last couple of, I think it's like 5 hours of 5 different episodes. But then it became, I thought it was really a great way to look at recent American history through the lens of a specific community. Because there was stuff, I remember these events happening, but I didn't know about the Asian community's, involvement or, perspective on it. So, there's a lot of good stuff on TV too.
Of course, of course.
Now I'm trying to think of books that I've read.
That's okay. That's okay. I do want to end by asking you the seminal question of the podcast, which is, how do you think disability can save the world?
Oh, definitely they can save the world, especially post-pandemic. Disabled people are the most resilient people on the planet. They've already been through all kinds of ableism, inaccessible schools, they've learned so many workarounds. They know how to make anything work, basically. In fact, if they've had really bad experiences, sometimes they're even more knowledgeable. It's sad that they've had the bad experiences, but on the other side, able to really, make their way in the world better than everybody else. So I think in this, like we were talking about before, in this post-pandemic world, we need disabled people to lead us. They know how to mitigate these problems we're going to face. They know how to interact with people they barely know, because, I'm starting to add a lot more about horizontal identity to my disability studies classes, because I think it really helps people understand where disability rights is coming from, that you haven't had as great of experience with your biological family that is vertical, but your horizontal identity comes from your community, like the gay community gets their, community from these people in their community that are leading the way. And I think the same for the disability community. They know how to network in a way that builds community and not just like, oh, I know you, can I ask you a question, but really connect with people that they may never ever meet in person,
Yeah.
but they have genuine connections. People are always like, we got to get offline. Why all this online stuff is bad? I'm like, I think it's fantastic. Like it's much more enjoyable for me to be relaxed here in my own home, talking to someone than go rent a car and fly there and get to their house and, worry about whatever,
Absolutely.
less stressful. So I think, like I said, they should lead us because they know how to get us to the point of being resilient and moving us forward, and how to live on very little money too, given what disability pay is in the state, and the Social Security disability, that kind of thing. So they are going to be the leaders, and
Fantastic.
fingers crossed. The word is Joe Biden is looking at Tammy Duckworth as a potential vice president.
I heard Klobuchar and I was like, that's a losing ticket. So
Right. No, I think he knows he has to pick somebody like Kamala Harris or Stacey Abrams, or Tammy Duckworth is the best of all worlds.
That's true.
Because she's disabled,
Amazing.
she's a veteran, she's a person of color, she's a mother, she like hits so many boxes in a good way, that so many people can relate to her, like, and you could, like, the evil Republicans won't be able to attack her because she's a veteran. She's basically going to be bulletproof because she got her disability flying a helicopter in the military.
Yes.
So,
And we could actually have a disabled leader. That's so your hope or your premonition for the future might come true.
I wish.
Thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Sure.
This has been such a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again to Beth for coming on the show. Get in touch by sending us an email at disabilitysavestheworld@gmail.com. If you're interested in learning more about me, you can check out my website at fadyshinuda.com. This podcast is hosted and produced by me, Fady Shinuda, and now edited by Yasmina Garcia. Thank you for listening, and see you next time on Disability Saves the World.